Guys, how we doing? Back in another video from Any News. It looks like we got the final Shalltear video. Boom. We'll do this, and then we're back on the Fate Lore videos, and we got some Shield Hero Cook content videos to react to. But for now, why is Shalltear the strongest?
In previous lore videos, we tried to answer a
And they've all been good.
question.
I've really enjoyed these Overlord
How strong
videos.
is the NPC? To do this,
Really enjoy
we
them.
analyzed the possible intentions and personality of the creator,
Because they
as
reflect
well as the
upon
nature and
yeah.
details of the build in order to explore each NPC's
It's been really good
combat
seeing all the
potential
stats
and
in that,
draw.
yeah.
Basically, we looked at how they might be used in the game Yggdrasil, as well as roughly how powerful they stood next to other NPCs from the game. But in the case of Shalltear, the answer has been stated rather clearly.
That she is the strongest.
Shalltear is the strongest
Oh,
War
yeah.
Guardian, and the second strongest NPC,
Rubetto.
below the mysterious Rubetto.
Oh, yeah.
So to finish off this three-part power
I remember these
of
things.
Shalltear's character, rather than answer the usual question of how strong is Shalltear, instead, we're gonna look at why is Shalltear so strong.
Why?
It's an interesting question because considering that Rubetto had a unique creation process theorized to be from the direct contribution of a world item, that would mean among all of the ordinary NPCs created by the 41 members of Ainz had managed to create the strongest.
Yeah.
But how? What
How did he
makes
do it?
Shalltear so special? But before we do that, we still have to finish off the last part of her build that defines her full capabilities,
Oh.
her equipment.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
for that, don't forget that the Succubae and Pleiades merch are
They're
available
cool.
in the link
I
in the
like them.
description. Now, let's begin.
Alright.
Her weapon is a Divine class item, translated either as Spewit Lance or Pipette Lance.
Spewit.
Pipette is the technical term for what is often called an eyedropper, while
a
Spewit is the
pipette.
Dutch word for
Right,
a
okay.
syringe, needle, or spout. As a lance, it's rather difficult to wield effectively in a melee battle, as Shalltear is generally limited to thrusting it at her opponent.
Yeah, it does seem quite
making
awkward.
it difficult to block, parry, or feint. Shalltear would often employ her flight magic to charge at an enemy with lightning-fast speeds, leveraging speed to increase the power of her blows
Rider.
in much the same way that a lancer on horseback would. Of course, given Shalltear's overwhelming strength, she can also use its thin, durable tip as a sword against weaker opponents.
Yeah?
Now, as a Divine class item, it would be among the strongest of all weapons aside from world class items. But it appears that much of its data crystal capacity, the power level defining trait of weapons in Yggdrasil, was devoted to enabling its special ability. An ability that lets her steal a fraction of the damage it deals as life force,
Yeah, it
drawing it out of
heals
the
them.
target like a syringe and into a large circular chamber where it can then be used by Shalltear as immediate healing.
Damn.
So yeah, this weapon granted passive lifesteal, giving her the ability to heal herself for free, so long as she can directly
Pretty
strike her opponent
decent.
with it, making her very effective in battles of attrition against melee opponents or groups of weaklings. Then, as we saw during her battle with Ainz,
God, the light's bright in
she
this,
can
isn't it?
also use it to heal off of her own
Oh,
summon,
God, raise my face.
a feature that wasn't available in Yggdrasil due to the fact that friendly fire was disabled. Generally speaking, it seems to drain blood from the target, since Shalltear claims she can use this drain ability to extract the blood from her opponents in order to avoid triggering her blood frenzy passive.
Right.
But if the target doesn't have any blood, it somehow still works fine. But
Oh.
don't ask me how or why this works.
Okay.
It was never really
It
explained.
just does.
Then, her only other noticeable pieces of equipment are her legendary unnamed armor, the game encyclopedia from Pararoncino, and the ring of Ainz. You're already well aware of what the ring does.
Yeah.
So, how about the armor? Well, the details on the
It's so
functionality of
cool.
it are currently unknown.
That's awesome.
It also doesn't have any special abilities or features. All we know is that it's intended to be used as her primary set of combat gear. So, the only thing that we can speculate for this is that it must somewhat boost her strength, provide physical or magical protection, or even power up her special abilities. Perhaps even some combination of all three. Which leaves us now with the game encyclopedia. It was gifted to her by Ainz one day, as a reward for her ever-loyal service. Ainz was rewarding all the NPCs, but always had a hard time thinking of a good
What to
gift.
give them, yeah.
Especially since they would claim to never want anything.
Yeah, they
So
would, wouldn't
he
they?
began
Ah,
giving them items
there's
that
nothing
were
you
once
could possibly
owned by their
give me
creators.
except just letting us be your
Encyclopedia
servant.
was part of the set of starting items for all players, and contained a bestiary with a list of all the monsters in the game. By default, it had very little information in it, aside from the in-game lore.
Right.
Reason being that it was meant to be filled by the player, with detailed
Oh.
information on gameplay statistics, like stats, abilities, and combat tactics. Pararoncino, being the power gamer he was, nearly filled its entirety by the time he had quit the game.
Damn.
But before handing it over to Ainz,
I know
he
lifer,
erased
like me
nearly
on Destiny 1 when that came
everything
out.
most likely due to the inappropriate things he had written in it that was
God.
too embarrassing for him
Good
to share
times.
with Ainz. So that's her equipment. Now let's get back to answering the video's title question.
Why?
I've given you
Why is she so
the
strong?
individual specifics of Shalltear's build, but it's when you put them all together and see the end result and bigger picture of what Pararoncino created that you notice how truly impressive it is.
Right.
You see, Pararoncino created a physical and magical hybrid that wasn't too weak at either.
Damn.
Something
All
that
those
was
stats are
very
so high.
hard to find in Yggdrasil due to the seemingly impossible balancing act that you'd have to perform to make it viable.
See, we did that bounce
Remember,
cast and she's standing on the
chances
thing.
of success of certain spells depended on the level of the caster and their investment in magic-related classes. So things like crowd control spells cast by fighter-caster hybrids would likely not be very useful against someone with high defensive magic. Similarly, melee fighters relied on a large selection of abilities to fight, some with low cooldowns and others which could only be used a few times a day. But this allowed for effective combinations of moves when in combat. Thus, lacking variety in abilities like these would make it difficult for Shalltear to competently fill that fighter role, or even duel a specialized CQC fighter effectively.
Close quarters
Since
combat, right?
she would likely run out of special abilities before them, and end up being essentially powerless at that point. So then, why is it that with this seemingly jack-of-all-trades master-of-none type build, is she still considered the strongest 1v1 fighter? Well, the first step to answering that lies in her role as an NPC back in the video game Yggdrasil. You see, 1v1s weren't exactly common in this game. The core gameplay revolved around the mechanics of group fights, and as it is with any team game, a group of specialists with dedicated roles are often stronger than a group of generalists. We can see this concept in action in a lot of places, from video games to even sports.
World of Warcraft.
And the way it goes is that, generally, the smaller the number of people on each team, the more versatile each individual has to become. This being due to the fact that each person has to cover more roles and be knowledgeable in more fundamental
You need to
aspects
do
of the
your
game.
bit.
Take badminton, for example.
Okay.
There's not exactly significant division of duty when playing doubles with a partner. Both players need to be highly skilled in nearly all aspects of the game in order to compete properly, though sometimes one partner favors the back, while the other partner favors the front.
Yeah.
But for games that have large teams, like football, or games with a variable and potentially limitless number of participants, like, say, war, politics, or the economy, well, it's there that you see the most specialization. It's also there where there are two main paths to victory. Either play the existing game
This is really
better than your
interesting.
opponents, or completely change how the game is played. You either find a collection of people who are so hyper-specialized that your opponent can't even hope to match them, or you create a new mix of roles and a new strategy for employing them that allows you to defeat your opponent in an unexpected way. For the most part, Yggdrasil played like the latter, but it was through having a group of specialists that you can employ both of these strategies. You could attack your opponent with anywhere from a single person to an army of thousands of summons, NPCs, mercenaries, and players. Thus, the game primarily rewarded large groups of players who were specialized and could create strategies that leverage cooperation and synergy. That's not to say that you couldn't create these same synergies with some generalist-type characters as well. They'd just be slightly less effective, but at the same time, have less weaknesses. It's just that while specialized characters normally come with disadvantages and downsides, so long as you can avoid being in situations where those disadvantages matter, then you actually lose nothing for specializing. Ainz's former guild is a prime example of this, as it was filled with these specialist-type
Yeah, they're all
characters,
different, aren't they?
and each had synergy with other members. But that's a topic for another video. What I'm getting at is, if the game was so focused on team-based combat, then where does the 1v1 aspects come into play?
Yeah.
If you're a solo player, a dueler, or a competitor in 1v1 tournaments, then yeah, sure, Shalltear's build would make sense. But since Shalltear is none of those, then it would seem that she was designed to just be good in small fight scenarios. She frequently accompanied Ainz when he went to confront lone intruders that would enter Nazarick during the days of Yggdrasil, and this surprisingly wasn't uncommon. Lone scouts were sent all the time to scope out enemy guild bases.
Alright, and she'd just be able to just go
There was
boom.
no risk on a single person being captured and killed, and the reward for any knowledge on the inner workings of the base were very much worth it. So, not wanting to reveal any of Nazarick's strength, tactics, or defense strategies, they would send as few people as possible to take on the intruders.
Makes sense.
And most often, Shalltear and Ainz were more than enough to take care of them.
Well, yeah,
meaning
yeah.
that
That's class.
enemies wanted to know more.
Create a
They had to bring
1v1
in
build,
much
and then as
larger
soon as anyone invades or tries
even
to
an
scope it
army,
out,
and risk a
gone.
lot more loss at the same time. So, whether or not Pararoncino carefully considered her role, it's clear that in practice, she ended up being a useful member of Nazarick's defense force. But what really makes Shalltear so good in 1v1 battles? Obviously, if she had better gear or higher stats, she'd be able to beat a weaker opponent easily. And as a matter of fact, part of the reason for her strength can be found in the fact that her base combat statistics average out among the highest of the NPCs with character sheets.
Yeah.
Sporting a total of 732 stat points, 43 points ahead of Albedo and Mare, who are tied for second. Of course, if her opponents were highly skilled, they could probably just exploit her AI. After all, normally, she was just an NPC that could only rely on simple programming scripts. But let's focus on our sentient self, and see what would happen if she was an idiot, meaning she would use all her skills and abilities optimally and to the best of their ability. In any 1v1 between characters of equal caliber, the victor is typically the one who has access to the most options. Now, I'm going to be using this word a lot, so keep in mind that options just means the number of paths that she can take at any given time, due to whatever skills, abilities, or items are currently available to her. So what I mean when I say that the person with the most options will usually win, is that if for any situation during the fight, if you have the option or opportunity to counter your opponent's move with one of your own, and you are knowledgeable enough to know when to use said moves, then you'll most likely win that fight. Imagine in fighting games, the little hierarchies of movesets, where basic attack spam is countered by guarding, and guard spamming is countered by throws. But if the enemy predicts that you're going to throw him because he's guard spamming, then he has the opportunity to counter it with an attack of his own. Now, imagine if one person had a fourth option, like a grapple hook, and the enemy did not. This grapple hook would counter both the grab and the guard spamming, limiting the number of options that the enemy had, meaning the one with the grapple hook would likely win the fight. Now, imagine once again that instead of something simple like that, we now have a complex tree of skills and abilities that counters others and are countered by others. Then naturally, those with the most sets of powerful options available for their use at any given time will have the edge over an opponent with less. So, for a game like Yggdrasil, where build customization was seemingly endless, it's more likely that an anomaly like Shalltear will arise, one that has access to the most strongest options. And just like it was with teamfights, the versatility you get from having options is vital to any 1v1. However, that doesn't mean that someone like Pandora's Actor, someone who has a wide array of options available to him at any time, would necessarily be the 1v1s. These options require some degree of strength in order to be useful.
Yeah, you can't just have...
because you can do something doesn't mean that it will be effective. If you spread yourself too thin to gain the maximum number of options, then it doesn't matter how many you have.
You've got to be able to be good at it.
Meaningful or impactful. Then, by contrast, a hyper-specialist may have one option that's very strong, and thus very effective for winning against certain opponents. But they'd be extremely weak in other situations. Take Peroncino's sniper build, for example. He can instantly kill individual targets from long range. But take that range away from him, and it's less likely that he'll be able to one-shot him. So, what makes someone strong at 1v1s is having a mixture of these two extremes. Having options that are strong enough to give you a decisive advantage, while also having a diverse enough array of them, so that you have multiple different alternatives for situations when your opponent is too powerful and you need some kind of counter-strategy. Generally, there are two kinds of options. Ones which are powerful enough to force the enemy to devise a specific strategy or technique to defeat them, and ones which are only really used to counter an enemy's specific strategy or technique. A good build will have lots of options in the former, in order to cover as many bases as possible, as well as a few in the latter, to reduce their number of glaring and easily exploitable weaknesses. So, let's apply all this 1v1 theory to Shalltear now. Consider her mobility. She has access to the fly spell, various teleportation spells, as well as immunity to having her mobility restricted. This gives her options against opponents at many ranges. At long range, she can fly or teleport to chase them down, and at short range, she can do the same to maintain distance and kite with ranged spells. And there's really nothing that her opponents can do to keep her in place due to her immunities. This gives her mobility options that can't be significantly countered, and the only feasible response to it would be to have better mobility than she does. Now let's consider her healing. Her investments in restoring HP and MP means that she can survive for a long time in battles of attrition. She can just gain health back with her Spirit Lance, then use her blood pool to gain back mana from enemies with blood.
Just crazy.
Of course, those who can avoid getting hit often, or are of a race that doesn't have blood, then that would diminish Shalltear's advantages. But that's why she has other sources of healing. high-powered healing spells that can instantly fill her HP bar. But what if you one-shot her with someone like Ulbert or Ainz? Well, Perroncino gave her a consumable specifically for occasions like these, one that allows her to instantly revive once. And if all that is still not enough to outlast her opponent, she then has her summons to slowly wear her opponent down.
She's got so much going on. All her options are decent.
It'd be best not to use them at all. Notice how Ainz didn't summon any of his undead, despite that being a major aspect of his build. This was because Shalltear could easily kill them and then use them as mobile lifesteal stations. On the other hand, Shalltear's summons against Ainz forced him to use valuable and limited resources to destroy them. It's a scenario that highlights that knowing when not to use your options is just as important as knowing when to use them.
Yeah.
Shalltear's Shalltear is another good example of an ability that gives her lots of options. Being able to swarm and double-team her opponent, or even have it protect her while she fires spells from a distance, goes a long way in making any 1v1
pretty decent
exponentially harder for the opponent.
Yep.
It's a key option that isn't so easily countered, and I don't imagine that many other people have it. It also heavily reduces the number of options her opponent can have, as the scope of her abilities just greatly increased. Knowing all this now, Shalltear's build, in a nutshell, is one that specializes in having a handful of strong and dominating options. The clone to double damage output or distract enemies, the spells to harass from long range or heal herself, the summons to overwhelm opponents, flight to chase them down, barriers to defend herself, and so on. A lot of these stem from magic, and magic is basically the primary tool that opens up more options. Each spell paves more paths to be taken during a fight, and whether that path leads to a counter resulting in a dead end, or keeps leading to victory, is completely dependent on the user. Of course, there comes a point where you can have too many spells, and you end up having a bunch in your arsenal that are just ineffective.
Yeah, not useful, don't need them.
Was around 300, with the exception of Ainz, who had over 700,
Damn.
Though each had very narrow applications. As for Shalltear, she realistically only needs around 100 to effectively cover and account for most situations, which, on paper, if used optimally by a not-so-dumb version of Shalltear, it would lead to her victory in a 1v1 almost
a not-so-dumb version.
So, why did she lose to Ainz? Well, mostly for that reason. She didn't capitalize on everything that she had at her disposal. You see, Ainz's options were severely limited. He was forced to use mostly direct damage spells that he wasn't specialized in, forcing the fight into a battle of attrition, where, by all means, Shalltear should have won. But because Ainz bluffed the existence of more than one exploding mind trap spell, he was able to trick Shalltear into thinking that there were dozens all around her, both on the floor and in the air.
Yeah.
In turn, Shalltear couldn't take the risk because the damage that these did were significant and would cost a lot more MP in order to heal. This forced her to stay at range, allowing Ainz to continue to sling spells from a distance, and capitalize on Shalltear's low magic defense stats, one of her few exploitable weaknesses. But if Shalltear had just played it smarter and used her summons to check for traps, then she would have easily been able to see that these traps were merely bluffs, and she could have continued to engage at closer range. Of course, she did eventually realize that it was a bluff, but Ainz was ready to counter all of her other options. By waiting to use the goal of all life is death, he was able to take out 3 of Shalltear's most powerful tools, Ainz, her resurrection item, and all of her summons. He also feigned ignorance on knowing the full extent of her build, causing Shalltear to fight in a way that Ainz expected. He'd then use specific spells in order to bait out others, causing her to exhaust her mana and skills before using his big instant death spell, which brought the fight to the endgame.
Damn right.
This resulted in her being unprepared for Ainz's secret weapons. So, as you can tell, though Ainz was going into the fight handicapped, he used his options effectively, and this led to his victory. If Shalltear was able to do that herself,
if you know how to use your stuff, use it well.
It's how her build was designed to be. But unfortunately, she's no power.
You can't just have every single spell under the sun and expect to be able to use them effectively.
Opponents who are more prepared and more skilled will continue to beat her, despite the vast array of powerful options that are available to her. And that's why Shalltear's so strong, bringing us to the end of Shalltear's character profile. I can't believe I actually started this all the way back in December.
Crazy, though.
She did have the most detail on her, so I guess it makes sense. Anyway, the poll has been decided, and the next character covered, or characters I should say, will be Aura and Moray together. So
cool. Alright, cool.
Sometime in the future, after of course a few more Shalltear videos. Now, before I go, don't forget that the merch links are in the description below, so feel free to support the channel by grabbing one of those. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time,
Ciao.
ciao.
Cool, man. God damn. Some very valid points in there, and I like how he describes things with like other situations that help make sense of what he's talking about. It's very good. The videos are always very well put together. I just like the way he pronounces things sometimes. Like, what was it, a pipette? I know it as a pipette, but I might be wrong. Not that it's relevant. But yeah, Shalltear, man. Beast. And yeah. If you got all that stuff, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be 100% effective with everything. You're going to specialise in certain things, aren't you? So there's no point in knowing all those little spells and then not being effective with it. Yes, that's all the Shalltear ones then. Cool. God damn. So we're going to go with the Hercules videos next when it comes to the Fate ones, and I've still got Shield Hero cut content videos to react to. So yeah, there's still plenty of stuff going on. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. What did you guys think of that? What did you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what you're watching, discuss it in future videos, and I'll see you guys. Next time.